Russian, and certainly won't be able to reply in Russian.
Okay. Try to speak English to me, not British. Because I may not spit this shit out of your mouth and speak English, mate.
Speak the speech.
Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Tabak, and I'm a retired U.S. Navy captain, and I'm presently in Kiev with the humanitarian mission. And I wanted to speak to a very new but yet very good friend of mine now, a professor, Frank Ledwidge. Frank is a professor at Oxford University, but I don't hold that against him. And you can see he looks like a normal person, and I look like a professor, just to do that. And Frank has written a book about aerial warfare, and he's part of a think tank in Ukraine. And he'll talk about it if he wants to. But the interesting thing is that Frank is also a British intelligence officer and a fellow naval officer. So, Frank, welcome to Kiev. How do you like Ukraine?
I like it a lot, Gary. It's a great honor to be here, and I've had a fantastic time, but also got to realize and see the struggle of the Ukrainian people and the sufferings imposed upon them by the aggressor, which is very obvious to anyone who's here just even for a short time. But the answer to your question is, this is a Premier League capital of a Premier League country.
And it's being bombarded by the barbarians, by the missiles. And you've written a book, Aerial Warfare, a very short introduction, but yet it is a very, very good introduction. And I recommend for any military leader or any military person to read it, because you describe very well in this book exactly what's happening now, how to fight that type of a war, because none of us have an experience in that type of war. I never had an experience like that in my military career of 30 years, and I don't know anybody none of my teachers. The only thing is my grandfather only fought a war like this, World War II. So none of us have an experience or knowledge of a war like this. Yet you go step by step of how to fight that kind of a war. What do you think? What do you think the problem here is? Why is it taking so long to fight this war?
Well, concerning the air war over Ukraine now, it's worth remembering, and I touch on this in that book, but generally speaking, that since the Second World War, about 90% of aircraft have been shot down from the ground. And we see that again here in Ukraine. So what we've got is the Ukrainian Air Force, and I have the privilege of teaching them. I teach at the Royal Air Force College, or have taught at the Royal Air Force College now for some years. And we had the honor of having Ukrainian cadets with us. And those guys now, many of them and women, are involved in the air defense of Ukraine now. And because the Air Force for many years, I think, has been underfunded here, or at least is small, they have relied very heavily on their ground-based air defences and missile systems. And as I said, I said this very early in the war on British media, what we've seen here is a battle against an overwhelming aggressor that historians will look back on as an example of how to fight such a war. So we in Britain, particularly the Royal Air Force, they remember very strongly the Battle of Britain. Well, the Battle of Ukraine has demonstrated the same kind of innovations, skill, courage, system thinking, and sheer intelligence that the Battle of Britain did. And like I said, that's how we're going to see it. It's going to have that level of historical resonance, the way the Ukrainians defended their country. Not so much with aircraft, although that's played a part. This time, it's with missiles. Not just the missiles themselves, but the systems which link them together and the way that they used that. It was inventive, it's clever, it was brave, and it outwitted and essentially denied the air and has defeated the Russian Air Force in the air, which is I have to say, a great surprise to most people, but a very pleasant one.
It was a surprise to me as a naval officer that the country that has no navy has defeated and sunk the unsinkable ship of the unbeatable army of the glorious Russia with the two small missiles.
Yeah, met with a very unfortunate
and
accident.
And the Slava class ship, the Moscow that they sunk, was built to destroy our aircraft carrier groups, not just the aircraft carrier, but the entire group. So we see how this war has pointed out, but yet, do you think Ukrainians have enough weapons? Well, from my travels to the front, I see that there's a huge shortage of weapons, of heavy weapons. How will be able the Ukrainians, without proper instruments, proper heavy weaponry, go into the counteroffensive? Is it possible, in your opinion?
So I've spent the last 6 weeks here as a visiting fellow at the Transatlantic Dialogue Centre, which is one of Ukraine's leading international think tanks. And in the course of my work here, I've met quite a lot of soldiers, legionnaires, and of course many, many relatives of soldiers. Watched the news, done all the things that we would do otherwise. The answer to your question, Gary, is that, well, let me put it this way. So I know, if you don't mind me saying, your daughter's in the Navy, your nephew's in the Navy. My son now is 17, he's a big, strong guy, very fit. And if this war goes on, what we will see is my son, say, in the Royal Marines, making a landing in Odessa to retake it, or one of the southern cities, in 2 or 3 years' time, with your daughter and your nephew fighting in support. Because this war will go on unless the Ukrainians are given the weapons they need to win it now. So that we're not talking about a fight going on for 2, 3, 4 years. Which involves all of Europe and beyond. And Europe has yet to appreciate that this war is not a war only for Ukraine, it's a war for European freedom. And this is a problem for Europe they need to internalize. And for Britain, I think it's slightly separate. My own country, very proud to say that I think we have done our bit. We'll come to the United States in a second. But the same is not true for the countries of the European Union, in my view. I think there's a very strong argument to be made, and I make that argument, that they've been slow. Some countries have done better than others, clearly. But there's a lot of talk, of course, about, and we'll come to that, about artillery, tanks, aircraft, etc. But even the small things, you've seen this going to the front. I've talked to many soldiers, British, American and others, Ukrainians, of course, who say the same thing. Basic stuff. The first things you're issued on a combat deployment, you and I were, helmet, we used to call it flak jacket, body armour now.
I do call it flak jacket.
There's the age. Body armour they call it now. The Osprey stuff that we get, and whatever the Americans have, very good equipment.
Night vision, thermal vision.
Yeah, and rifles. Good rifles.
And rounds.
And rounds to fire through them. And I was I think it's fair to say, quite shocked talking to some of these brave guys, Ukrainian and other nationalities, and they all said the same. Well, look, our commanders, they do their best. We may get some good rifles when we get to the front, but we can't train on the same rifles and so on. So let's just start there. Helmets to protect your, and body armor to protect your vitals. These are basic stuff. This is not difficult. Germany, Spain, France, Italy, UK, Finland, all the other countries. There's no excuse for that. We'll come to artillery and all the heavy stuff later. But as a start, let's try that. You and I were talking before we came on air. Who knows how many? I don't know, because we know that there's many thousands. Battlefield mobility, right? Some of you may have seen this morning or recently a video showing Ukrainian casualties following an artillery strike, and this is happening time and time again. Why is it happening? And it's unnecessary because of lack of armoured battlefield mobility, which is to say armoured personnel carries armoured fighting vehicles from which your excellent infantry can fight without fearing artillery concussion, splinters and whatnot. Basic stuff. We're not talking about complicated, expensive, controversial weaponry that's going to annoy the Russians or cause escalation or whatever arguments are used. So we'll start there at those basics. Boots, for goodness sake. There's no excuse for that. Those should be pouring through. All of that stuff should be pouring through.
We have a land lease that is already, practically 3 months old, and so far we've got nothing on land lease.
Yeah.
Ukrainians. We're not even talking about heavy machinery, but Humvees. I mean, we don't have them. We don't have them in our military any longer. It must be hundreds and thousands of them, and yet we can't even send them to Ukraine. Sounds very, very strange to me. And what's said to me as an American is that you, the Brits, took the lead. Thank to Boris Johnson. Of course, I think the Ukrainians will eventually have to build a monument to that man in the center of Kiev. But you know, it's a sad thing that the United States is not doing its part. It's not giving its share to contribute to the victory in this war. And every day their civilians are dying here. You and I have seen this. We went to see those areas. Children are being killed, and just the terror style warfare where the Russians are just firing missiles at will, and wherever it lands, and shopping malls and schools, hospitals, killing a lot of people. And yet the United States, I think my own country, is kind of not as responsive as Great Britain in that sense, which saddens me. And I don't understand why we cannot do that, because as you know, in the United States, we have hundreds and thousands of artillery pieces that are being mothballed, as well as tanks, as well as armored personnel carriers and fighting vehicles, and the rounds and the ammunition. So why is Lend-Lease not working? I don't understand.
Okay, well, I think it's worthwhile starting for me anyway with the UK. So the UK has given about 20% of our artillery. Now, to be fair, we didn't have much artillery to start with. We've cut our artillery to the bone.
Well, we didn't think that we were going to fight those kind of wars anymore with artillery and tanks and airplanes.
And how wrong we all were.
Right.
You know, everyone was talking these magic words of hybrid warfare and information maneuver and all this shamanistic illusion, when in fact warfare has always been and will always involve hardware and casualties. So yeah, when the UK, I think, has done its bit and has led the way, and I'm not saying that because I'm British, I'm saying just because that's the way it is.
Well, I'm not British, but I'm saying the same thing, and I think a lot of military people are saying the same thing, that the Great Britain has saved the day for Ukraine and for the rest of us, because this war is just not just Ukraine. It's not just Russia-Ukrainian war. It's Russia against the whole world, but unfortunately it's only Ukrainians who are fighting this for the rest of the world, for the rest of us.
Yeah, I think most British people realise, or many British people realise, certainly the majority, that the Ukrainians are fighting for all of us. It's our war. And when I meet Ukrainians, particularly Ukrainian military or officials, which I do occasionally, the first thing to be said is that we are all in this together. This is our war as well. And also when I'm at home doing shows like this, it's our war as well. As for the US, look, I can't comment on US politics, I don't know enough about it, but what we can say is we can put some numbers to this. So let's start with tanks. So the United States has in storage, and anyone can find this out if anybody's interested, 2,300 M1 Abrams tanks. Now, some of them are a bit old, so you wouldn't want to use all of those. Let's say we could get hold of 500 M1 for the somewhat nerdy, we call them in Britain spotters like me, who can identify these things and know the difference. M1A2, which is probably the best tank in the world, apart from, there's an argument about that, but certainly it's good enough to smash any Russian tank.
Right.
So there are hundreds of those in storage, and I suspect plans are afoot actually to get them moving. Obviously there are political problems in the US I can't comment on. I don't know enough about that. I suspect that General Milley and his team are looking at ways to staff this, and you know the logistics problems of all this, and let's hope they are. I suspect they are, but you know what? This should have started way back. Decisions should have been made, not this piecemeal drip feed of, well, we'll give you 4 HIMARS. I understand why they did that, but now we have demonstrated the Ukrainians, to put it mildly, can use these.
Can do it.
The M777 artillery, same thing. Now they've got a 2 or 3 regiments worth. Well, let's make it some brigades worth, or divisional artillery. Let's make it hundreds of those. Get the people trained, bring them to the UK. These are UK artillery made in the UK, design there anyway, and so on and so forth. But the tanks, the armoured fighting vehicles, the armoured personnel carriers, form what is called, along with some air aspects and artillery, combined arms warfare. And a combined arms brigade, which the Ukrainians have several of already now, the ones that they've had have fought immensely bravely and taken huge casualties. And those will need to be reformed, re-echeloned and prepared for the fight. Now, this should have been brought forward. Decisions should have been made that we will equip and train and arm 10, let's say for example, 10 mechanized brigades in the Ukrainian armed forces. If that decision hasn't been made now, let it be made so that those brigades are ready for the fight. If not this, because we are going to go on, if not this autumn, then next spring, and they're ready to win then. And because Ukraine has imposed some severe tactical costs, to put it mildly, on the ramshackle mob that some people call the Russian army. It's imposed tactical costs on those and taken great casualties in the process. But what we need is to impose strategic cost, and that means threaten Crimea. It means take back Donetsk and Luhansk. It means take back Mariupol and Berdyansk, and impose a strategic cost that cannot be wished away with clever words in the Kremlin.
You think the Western leaders, as weak as they are, would do something like that? Would support Ukraine to push forward like this?
I think that you have some politicians. Again, I can't speak for Europe or the US is a separate thing. You have views on that, and I may or may not share those views.
Right.
But in the UK, we have some politicians, I think, who are our leaders now. I mean, Ben Wallace, of course, being preeminent amongst them, our Defence Secretary. He's far more sophisticated thinker than I am, and I've no doubt he would argue, or he and his staff would argue in detail some of the things I've said and say, well, we can't do this, we can do that, take longer than this, we can do this quickly, we can do this slowly. But I think the same message would come through. This is the guy, by the way, who said, quite rightly, when asked, should Ukraine fire missiles over the border into Russia, and he said, look, if we give the missiles to the Ukraine, it's for the Ukrainians to decide what to do with them,
right? Not
us.
Right.
And that's where we go back to Churchill. Give us the tools and we'll finish the job. And we can be sure, just to finish this session on this speech of mine on this note, we can be sure if they give the Ukrainians the tools, they will do the job.
Well, I would even go further. I would say that the Ukrainians will do the job even if we don't give them the tools.
Take longer.
It will take longer, and they will have to pay a higher cost.
Yeah.
So they will have to bleed much harder. So why wait? Why? What's the rationale then? Why wait? We know that Russia is done, that the Ukrainians are going to win, that the Ukrainian nation is being built right now, that the Ukrainian nation is being consolidated right now. So why wait? Let's help them, and we're going to have an ally, and a strong democracy right in the middle of Europe, along with Poland, the Baltic states, what about your? Even though you're a fellow naval officer, but you are an Air Force guru. You're an Air Force strategic thinker. What do you think? Does Ukraine need an Air Force? Does it need a strong Air Force? Because so far, the Russians have superiority in the air.
Yeah. The answer is yes, Ukraine does need a strong Air Force. I would quibble with you on one thing, and that is what Russia does not have is control of the air. What it has highly contested control of the air, thanks to the skills and intelligence and tactical acumen and operational acumen of the Ukrainian air defences. So control of the air obviously is challenged over Ukraine. So here, every day we have air warnings. Most of those air warnings are because there are incoming strikes. What we don't know and shouldn't know is how many of those strikes are shot down. I suspect a lot of them are shot down. I have no idea what the percentage is, but we know they are. So in other words, and it may well be, I speculate here, if Russian air commanders may well be starting to think quite soon, you know what, we're flinging all these precision guided missiles, they're getting shot down soon, we have to think about whether we want to to hold them back for perhaps another even more formidable enemy in the shape of NATO. But anyway, that's their decision. But back to your question. So first, Ukraine has succeeded in challenging Russia, the Russian air and space forces, as they call them, for control of the air. Second, does Ukraine need an air force? Yes. HIMARS, there's long and medium range artillery actually at the moment, has done a great job. And hopefully, we're not going to be talking once again about drip feeding, 5 here, 10 here. Now we've got 16. You know why? Because that's doing Russian military intelligence officers' jobs for them. They know then how well it is, you know.
Maybe we have 400.
Maybe. Let's
but
hope
they
that's
think
true.
that we have 4, or maybe it can vice versa. Who knows?
Right, so don't tell them anything. So
Well, I mean,
they're getting enough.
we have here in Ukraine a bunch of experts and journalists and commentators who constantly say, "Oh, well, 4 more coming, 2 more coming, 6 more. We have 20." I think, first of all, they have no knowledge of how many coming. They don't have access. They have no need to know. They don't have clearances to know that. And I think it's only general staff, maybe some people in general staff know exactly what the entire picture is. But unfortunately, journalists and they're speaking and saying things that are not true, and during wartime, when kids are getting killed, it's not a matter of ratings and views. And you also know, you've heard that they're saying that some of the equipment is being sold that we provide. The United States, Great Britain, Germany now is planning to provide quite a bit.
Yeah.
They're saying it's being sold
Yeah.
to Europe and it's being stolen. I was part of the ODC in Poland, and I can tell that it's impossible. It's easier to take Fort Knox than to steal a HIMARS or an artillery piece. But it's all over. It's probably starts out from the Russian GRU or KGB, FSB now, although I can't tell the difference between KGB and FSB, but they start those rumors from there. But the local very famous journalists and commentators pick it up and saying, "Oh yeah, we need another check, we need somebody to check, we need somebody to control, we need another controller, we need the inspector general to be involved." And I can tell, with being part of the ODC, there's agencies that follow that. So in your experience here, have you heard, were you able to buy something,
I did buy an Oplot tank last Tuesday,
right,
for a few $100s. I think that was a good bargain. And obviously, I'm going to sell that on to Bosnia quite soon.
Right.
Of course not. You can't.
Right. It's unfortunately it's informational warfare that is being fought very hard here, and unfortunately, those what we do useful idiots that help out a lot in this warfare. Also, what I'd like to tell you is that. A lot of people saying, "Oh, the NATO is doing a lot. NATO is doing." Well, now NATO is building up in Europe, like in a Cold War era. There's going to be tank division in Poland. There's going to be soldiers. We're going to have men. That's going to be increased to 200,000 of NATO forces in Europe. And I say, there is this old Russian joke. Well, maybe it's not a joke. Maybe it's a tale that says when there is, well, actually, you can't tell that on the air. So cut that one out. You need to, I think that Putin laughs at that. Because, all right, so you're moving troops around in Europe, in old Europe, you're building it. But in Ukraine, you're not doing anything. So you're kind of going like this to me, but I know you're not going to spank me. So I would say, if we would be serious, and if we would, instead of all that equipment and all those troops, sending that, even not involved in troops, sending it to Europe, send it to Ukraine, show it to the Russians, show it to Putin that we're deadly serious, and we're going to, then maybe his inner circle, maybe his cabinet, maybe people who are close to him will realize that the West is serious about it, and they're going to pay a huge price. Their family is going to pay a huge price. Maybe they'll take care of him. Maybe they're going to say then, okay, now these guys are serious, and this lunatic KGB thug is getting us killed. me personally, not some soldiers from Buryatia, but me here, my family, my accounts in the West, my mansion in Italy, and so forth. But so far, we're not making that move. Again, we're just playing and dancing with him, but not making a move.
Yeah, and that speaks of a lack of grand strategy here. That you mentioned before, that what we should be aiming for is for Ukraine to, and this is grand strategy, is to be a strong state, a democratic state, part of Europe, part of the European Union, part of NATO. And that's a grand strategy, which would impose those kind of costs you've talked about. But back to the operational level that you're speaking of, in NATO's expansion, all these grand words about what we're going to do and all that. We do have a saying in Britain, it's let's call it a phrase. It's "I'm all right, Jack." I'm all right, Jack. But you, however, maybe aren't so all right. So this strikes me as an "I'm all right, Jack" approach, which is we're going to defend ourselves. We're going to firm up the borders, the eastern borders of Estonia and the southern ones and the Baltics and Poland and down into the Carpathians and so forth. We'll do that. But what we're not going to do, of course, is push, as you said, push any of that forward. A grand strategy such as I've mentioned there would imply doing exactly what you say. And you know what the alternative is? Because this is what's going to happen. When we go right back to the start of our conversation, 2-3 years down the line, people have to realize that sooner or later, if it goes on, NATO will be getting involved. It will take a couple of rockets over the border, shot down by the Patriots in Jeshov or wherever they are, and there we have it. Finish it now. Give Ukraine the weapons we need. Impose a strategic cost on Putin, which has the consequences you described, and all that derives out of having a strategic vision which puts the defence of Ukraine first and not the current eastern borders of NATO. And that strategy is still lacking.
You see, I think that also, to add to what you're saying, I think that one of our former presidents said that the reason this war happened is because, not, truly because of Putin, but also because it's a weak leadership in the West. In Europe, in the United States, there are weak leaders and thugs and dictators like Putin take advantage of it and start wars. If we would have showed stamina and seriousness, that probably would not have happened. But that said, also, we were going to have only 15-minute conversation here, but it's taken us longer. But I'm sorry. But also, I wanted to discuss. There is a school of.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Sure.
Weak leadership is what's turning lights off in Germany now.
Right.
They had weak leadership for the last decade, so now they have cold showers and the lights aren't on at night.
Right.
Strong leadership, that wouldn't have happened.
Well,
if strong leadership now will prevent worse consequences down the road.
Right, because a lot of now there's some leaders, there's some politicians that are saying that stop the war, stop where it is. Russians are going to stop. The cold is coming. The winter is going to be soon. Let's stop. Let's negotiate. Let's sit down and do the diplomacy.
Right.
All it will do is Ukraine will be weakened. Furthermore, nobody's going to invest, knowing that a year, 2 or 3 from now, there's going to be even bigger war while Russians will regroup.
And what's the alternative? Just one thing, because I understand time is pressing, but the alternative is, for Europe, how do they like this prospect? Because they haven't invested with strong leadership and strong defences of Ukraine. A failed state with a strong army and angry people in the middle of Europe. How do you fancy that, Europe? How stable is that going to make your eastern borders then? And an aggressive and hostile, albeit gangster state in the east.
Yeah.
So with a proper strategy, that will lead you away from that awful prospect.
And Frank, the other thing is that I'd like to ask you, as a scholar, there is a school of thought that if we weakened Russia too much, then China will gain strength, and then we're going to have to deal with China. Then we're going to have to fight, and therefore, in the United States, our administration saying we can't give all these weapons because we need them. Because what if this stuff will happen with China?
Yeah.
And of course. We had the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, go to Taiwan just to provoke Chinese, and now everybody's saying, okay, well, maybe there's a war with China is coming. What do you think?
I think that if Russia is defeated and shown to be defeated, that will be a big message to China. Do not mess with the West. Do not mess with the United States in particular, because this is what's going to happen to you.
Right. I agree with you fully. And let's conclude and make a statement. Minister of Defense Reznikov has given to our Congress a list of things that are necessary for Ukraine. I don't know if you've seen that list, but you know they're 60 HIMARS or 80
I guess
HIMARS.
that list, yes.
I mean, they're not much, but I think we should give twice as much.
Yes.
But what do you think? Can you prioritize what do Ukrainians need immediately, and then as time goes on, what should it be in a heavy equipment?
Medium range artillery with ATACMS, which is the long range rounds. So
Right.
medium and long range artillery. Why? To hold at risk, not necessarily attack, hold at risk assets such as the Kerch Bridge, not to mention Russia's operational rear. So that's an immediate need. So in other words, 100 HIMARS, please, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.
100.
Yes, with a good stream of weapons, including the high-end 300 kilometers. It doesn't mean it's going to be used, and the US can, to be fair, they will probably want to have some say over how that's used, rightly or wrongly, but hold at risk these assets. Then, battlefield mobility, the basic stuff, the belt and braces stuff for mechanized brigades. Why? Because it's Ukraine's clear strategy and declared strategy and correct approach to retake its southern coast, Kherson, and then move across perhaps to Berdyansk, Mariupol, and then...
How many do you think they need?
I think 500 tanks is a minimum, which is what
Agreed.
they've asked for, plus 1,000 battlefield armored mobility in whatever form might take, AFVs,
Abrams.
APCs, 500 tanks.
Bradleys?
Bradleys, Warriors. There are hundreds and thousands of these throughout Europe, but perhaps one, for maintenance and logistics reason, one mark of each. So instead of having, Ukraine now has 10 forms of artillery
Right.
with 10 chains of logistics. Okay,
Right.
that's the way it is.
It's very difficult.
And they can do it. However, let's not make it difficult. 500 Abrams, M1, A2, late model, to arm 4 or 5 brigades to enable the Ukrainians to execute their operational objectives and not only hold at risk, but impose on Putin a strategic cost, which causes, at the very least, a rethink. Or simply, much more simply, end the war, retake the land that has been stolen from Ukraine at huge cost, and make the Russians pay a very heavy price for what they've done, as Boris
Absolutely.
Johnson said at the outset of this war.
Absolutely. And what about the Air Force?
Yeah. Air Force is a bit more difficult. Again, the Ukrainian pilots will learn to fly F-16s. So what? Now, air power experts will say the issue is not the pilots, it's not the avionics, it's the maintenance
It's
and
the
logistics.
logistics, right?
Okay, so there's a solution to this, and it involves paying contractors, US maintenance experts from F-16 squadrons, and there are many people who will be willing and able to do this. You pay them to come here to embed with Ukrainian logistics logistics maintainers, airmen, and the crucial aspect of air power, which is what won the Battle of Britain for us. Not the pilots, it's the maintainers, the armourers, the logisticians, the admin people, the fuelers, and the rest of them.
Absolutely.
And that it will be expensive, but it will give Ukraine an air force to threaten not just that operational rear, but deep into Russia's rear,
Right.
and eliminate their air force as a going concern, which is something I think we'd all like to see.
Yes, and we would like to see it soonest.
It would be
Thank you, Frank, for clarifying all this. Thank you for supporting me in this, because sometimes I think I'm the lone voice in it, I want to address people that see us, maybe some politicians or just citizens, to whom the freedom, independence, and respect for human rights are not empty words. To give support to Ukraine, to pressure your politicians to act as quickly as possible, to give the instruments to Ukraine to stop this bloody war, to stop this, I can't even call it a war, it's a bloody murder It's a cold-blooded murder of innocent people in this country that will affect all of us in the future. So hopefully somebody will hear us and things start to come to Ukraine quickly. Will come to aid these brave people and this brave nation as fast as we can. Thanks, Frank. Thank you for coming, my
It's a
friend.
privilege. Thanks, Gary. Bless you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Okay. All right, my friend. You
Thanks,
have to
Gary.
run.
I
Thank
do.
you. Thank you. I think it went well. What do you think? What do you think, Natalie? Or